So good day, good morning, hi, nice to see you. Welcome to the 2023 Fall Great Debate Panel Series. Of course, it's a little bit different this fall. It is not a panel, nor is it a debate. In fact, I have been kind of blessed with the universe in different ways. Obviously, this job is one of them. But I plan these things usually a semester in advance, and you've probably seen posters around campus advertising a debate panel on the 20th anniversary on the War on Terror. We are not talking about that today. Things kind of worked out to where we got two renowned scholars of Middle East politics available and willing to come speak to us today. So before we get started, I, of course, am Dr. Emily Stacey. For those of you who do not know me, I am a professor of political science and lucky enough to be the program coordinator for political science. So my life is getting to do these really cool events and helping you guys kind of digest some of these very complex political issues that are going on in your world. So that makes me I just am so lucky to be able to do this. I want to thank, right before we get started, Dr. Anita Pohl-Inslee, John Shackelford, the folks that make these things happen. The recording, the microphones, all of this stuff happens behind the scenes, and I'm very lucky to have these folks here at Rose State to work with. The faculty, the exec administration that have come, thank you guys so much for taking the time. My faculty colleagues as well. I appreciate you guys coming to, again, this very important conversation. Our two panelists, or speakers, I should say, at this point, are incredibly impressive. I have had goosebumps every time I talk to people about this event over the last couple of months. I get goosebumps every time because these two gentlemen are truly exceptional human beings and experts in their field. Dr. Joshua Landis is going to speak first, and he is the Sandra Mackey Chair and Director of the Center for Middle East Studies at OU. In the Boren College of International Studies. He writes and manages SyriaComment.com, a daily newsletter on Syrian politics, and publishes frequently in policy journals such as Foreign Affairs, my personal favorite. We have a subscription ongoing. Middle East Policy and Foreign Policy. His book, Syria at Independence, Nationalism, Leadership, and Failure of Republicanism, will be published by the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies this coming year. And he's frequently an analyst on television, radio, and in print, and is regularly on NPR, as well as the BBC, another one of my favorites. Just incredible. I mean, those are pretty incredible credentials, my friends. And then Dr. Hussam Mohammed is also no slouch. In fact, he is one of my favorite professors and one of the most rigorous professors that I had at the University of Central Oklahoma. In fact, I was just regaling him. In fact, some of the hardest classes that I had were his, but he developed my love of comparative politics, and why I do the stuff that I do today is in some part because of this gentleman right here. So Dr. Mohammed has taught courses in theories of comparative politics, Middle East politics, political fundamentalism, Islam and politics, Middle East conflicts, to name just a few that are listed. He's published numerous works, including U.S. policy and Israeli-Palestinian relations, President George W. Bush's legacy on Israeli-Palestinian peace process, and democracy promotion in the Arab politics, again, among many, many others. These two gentlemen, again, are pretty renowned. So very excited. Again, this is not a debate, so I'm not going to stand up here this time. You don't have to look at me the whole time. I didn't prepare any questions. I am not going to moderate. I'm just going to let these two do what they do best and talk about their field and their expertise and their love. So if you will, please give these gentlemen a round of applause for being here.
Well, it's such an honor to be here, and I want to thank Dr. Stacey for inviting me to come to Rose State, which is always great experience. And I want to, let me just make sure that this is somewhere close to me so that you guys can hear me back there. If you can't hear me later on in a talk, if I drift away, you let me know and just raise your hand and I'll know. And I want to, thank my good friend Hussam Mohammed. We're going to be on a panel later down at OU. And for sharing the podium with me. And anyway, let me just jump right in. I'm what I'm going to try to do in 15 minutes, we're each going to talk for 15 minutes, and we're going to take questions from you, because we want to have plenty of time to have questions and what's happening in the news and so forth. So what I want to do is talk not about Gaza, but about the West Bank, because most Palestinians under the occupied territories live in the West Bank. About 3.5 million live in the West Bank, which is over there. If you see Israel, big hunk of Israel is the West Bank, which is supposed to be a Palestinian state, if one wants a two-state solution. And after the '67 war, there was a UN resolution which America signed on to, land for peace. In other words, if the Palestinians agreed to recognize Israel, there would be a state in the West Bank and Gaza. That was the idea in 1967. We're far away from it today, and I want to explain what's going on in the West Bank so you'll see what pressures are on the Palestinian people. Now, before I get into that, I do want to say that nothing excuses the terrible violence that we saw on October 7th when Hamas broke out of the West Bank and killed 1,400 Israelis. But I think it's important to look at a little bit of the history. So I'm going to give you a little bit of history and how we got here to this level of animosity today. And what is the idea, what is the possibility for some peace agreement in the future? Or are we stuck in a terrible conflict that's not going to go away? That's the real question. Now here, I've given you, in my intro slide, two maps of Israel-Palestine. This is the map that's put out by Israeli map makers and is used in Israeli schools, many Israeli schools. And you can almost not see the West Bank. And you can't see Golan Heights up there, which is between Syria and Israel, which was occupied by Israel in 1967 and then annexed by Israel. And then President Trump recognized the annexation as it being part of Israel. But they've sort of disappeared. This is the way a Palestinian would look at it, as a state of Palestine that's supposed to be in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. This is the map that Prime Minister Netanyahu, the leader of Israel, held up most recently at a meeting of the UN to try to herald what he hoped would be a peace agreement between Saudi Arabia, which he's pointing to with his finger, and Israel, brokered by the United States, Abraham Accords, which this Gaza uprising has interrupted. But of course, Palestinians all saw this and realized that he had colored Israel in and covered in Gaza and the West Bank. There was no indication that Palestinians were going to be part of this Middle East in any way or their peace. So in a sense, he'd steamrolled the Palestinians, which upset many Palestinians, and they thought, well, the Abraham Accords are just going to be an effort brokered by the United States to forget the Palestinians. So in many ways, this uprising and this problems in Gaza is Palestinians saying to the world, you can't forget us. Let me just flip over here. Hopefully this will work, and it's not working. And I should have tried it before. Let me see if that's going to work. Okay, come on. Yes? Good, we got it. So let me give you a brief history. How did Palestine become Israel? Of course, we know that there have been Jews in Palestine for thousands of years. The Romans kicked them out. There is a big diaspora, and Jews are spread around the world. In the end of the 19th century, as nationalism grew up in Europe, Jews developed what's called Zionism, Jewish nationalism, the idea that we can't live in Europe, we need to go and have our own nation state. Where do Jews turn to have that nation state? Palestine, where, of course, biblically, they have this conception of a Jewish state in Palestine. Now, that was made possible by the British, because the British conquered Palestine when they defeated the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Turks ruled this whole region in the Middle East under the Ottoman Empire. And it's important to look at the population. In 1850, about 4% of the population of Palestine was Jewish. By 1914, the First World War, about 10% is Jewish. And then when Israel was established in 1948 as an independent state, about a third of Palestine was Jewish. These numbers are a little bit important because we're going to see that here's Lord Balfour. He's the British foreign minister, 1917, who promises Palestine to the Jews. Palestine is only 10% of the population at this time is Jewish. But he gives it anyway. And here is his remark to Lord Curzon, who said, you shouldn't have done that because it's going to be big trouble. And he says, Zionism, which is Jewish nationalism, be it right or wrong, good or bad, is rooted in age-old traditions, in present needs, in future hopes, of far profounder importance, of much greater importance than the desires and prejudices of 700,000 Arabs who now inhabit that ancient land. So you get a taste for why the British would do this, because they saw Jews as infinitely more important and advanced than Arabs. Just to give you a little sense of the times, I'm going to switch to a quote by Winston Churchill, the great hero of World War II, who was a leading light in the colonial office at the time Israel was created. And he says in 1937, I do not agree that the dog in a manger, I don't know how many of you know that phrase. I grew up with it because it was part of it was a common phrase. It's about a dog who doesn't let anybody else into the manger. A dog in a manger has the final right to the manger, even though he may have lain there for a very long time. So he's comparing Arabs to the dog in the manger. And of course he's using this because it has meaning to Christians of the manger with Jesus and so forth. So the Arabs are the dog in the manger, and even though they've been there for hundreds of years, thousands of years, they shouldn't have it. I do not admit that a wrong has been done to the Red Indians of America or the black people of Australia. I do not admit that a wrong has been done to these people by the fact that a stronger race, a higher grade race, a more worldly wise race has come in and taken their place. That's pretty clear. And this is what has happened in Palestine since then. In 1946, of course, the Jews were persecuted terribly in Europe. And it was hard to get Jews to leave Europe to come to Palestine in the 1910s and 20s. But by 1933, Hitler came to power in Europe and began to persecute the Jews. And they began to flee. America had closed their door to immigration in the 20s during the Great Depression because nobody had a job in America. And so Jews had nowhere to go, and they began to go to Palestine. And this changed the balance of the population from 10% Jewish to a third Jewish by 1946. And Jews began buying land, and they owned about 7% of the land and were a third of the population in 1948 when a war happens. And the 1948 war, the Arabs are beaten badly. And the Jews conquer 87%, 83%, Hussam. Any rate, they conquer over 80% of Palestine. 750,000 Palestinians flee or are chased out of their villages. 400-something Arab villages are destroyed. And they become refugees. 400,000 go to Jordan, 200,000 Lebanon, 200,000 Syria, some to Egypt, and so forth. And many come to the United States, end up teaching at our universities. But they become refugees, and many of them want to go back. They have the keys to their houses, they want to go back to their houses, but they can't. Israel passes a law that anybody who left their house during the hostilities for a period of 48 hours, I believe it was, would lose all their land, their house, their pharmacy, their farm, whatever it was they left, which was a way to dispossess the Palestinians and make way for Jews that were coming in from Europe at the end of World War II, displaced people, or Russians or other immigrants leaving the Middle East. So this is how you get a big transfer of population. But today, the West Bank, Palestinians have been losing control of the West Bank. And here is the area that Palestinians are still have some control of, the green parts. But the rest has been taken. 60% of the West Bank has been taken by Israel. And this is the first government, the Netanyahu government, which has openly proclaimed that it wants to annex the West Bank in its entirety to Israel. So there will never be a Palestinian state. And this leaves the Palestinians feeling desperate. And let's just go through a few numbers here so you can see what the story is. Jewish Israelis. There are about almost 7 million Jewish Israelis living in Israel. There are, inside Israel, there are about 1.6 million Palestinians who have Israeli citizenship and live in Israel, and they have done very well. They have cooperated with Israel, they have assumed Israeli citizenship, and they have become doctors and nurses and have flourished in many ways, even though they're not completely equal as citizens. But in the West Bank and Gaza, which have been under military occupation, where the Palestinians are not given citizenship, where they don't have a passport, they can't travel freely, and they have to go to military courts, and do not have any rights inside Israel. There are another, you see in the West Bank, down at the bottom, there are 2.7 million Palestinians. There are another in East Jerusalem, which we're not going to get into too many details. There are about 345,000 Palestinians. That's been taken by Israel and annexed by Israel, but they're still there without Israeli citizenship. So you have but what's been happening since 1967, since Israel conquered the West Bank and occupied it, is that Israel has been putting its own people into the West Bank. Let me show you here. Israel has been creating settlements in the West Bank, and today it has 240 settlements, and about 750,000 Israelis have moved into the West Bank and East Jerusalem and built houses and communities and so forth, sprinkled in and around the Palestinians. They have acquired 60% of the land of the West Bank, so you can see the green spots, the dark green spots are where where the Palestinians have control over their own lives, their police force, and so forth. The little lighter green is shared, the lighter green is joint Israeli-Palestinian control. But the Israeli army is there and has the ultimate control. and under Israeli control. And the blue parts of the West Bank have been requisitioned by the Israeli military, taken by settlers, built roads, parks, and is owned by Israel for the Israelis. So the Palestinians have lost all of that blue land. And it's also chopped them up. Like Swiss cheese, the Palestinians are the holes in the Swiss cheese. So they can't just drive from one part to another part because there are big roads like this that Israel has built tying together their parts, and Palestinians cannot use them. So they have to go, stop, get out of their car, go over the highway or under the highway, and then they can get a taxi to complete their trip. Or they have to go around in back roads to get, it's very difficult to travel. And here are a few facts. There are 240 settlements and 1,000 miles of these highways and roads built by Israel that are used only by settlers. 60%, as I said, of the occupied West Bank is for Israeli use only. And Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention says that occupying power shall not deport or transfer parts of its own civilian population into the territory it occupies. But that's exactly what Israel has done and is preparing to annex it. And the UN Charter says you cannot conquer territory, you cannot take territory by war. So the international community sees this as illegal. Israel says it's not illegal because this is not Palestinian land. This is our land. We are the natives in this land. And America has asked for the two-state solution, but has not done anything to stop Israel from acquiring that land or to stop building the settlements. President Obama tried to. He asked Israel, Netanyahu, to stop settlements when he first came to power as a naive young president who didn't know much about foreign policy. What happened is Netanyahu could run circles around President Obama. He came to Congress and he got many more standing ovations than President Obama did from both Democrats and Republicans. 120 congressmen and senators went to the West Bank and said, Israel is not the enemy. Iran is the enemy. Suggesting that President Obama should not accuse the Israelis, settlers, of being the enemy. And he shut up. Because his demand that Israel stop settlements was very unpopular in America and very unpopular in the US Congress. And he was booed down. He didn't try that again, needless to say. And no president since has tried to start peace talks again to get a Palestinian state because it's going to hurt them. It's going to hurt them politically. It's going to hurt their elections. And both Republicans and Democrats are fighting amongst themselves who can be more pro-Israel in order to win elections, get money for elections, because pro-Israeli Americans are numerous. And it's not just Jewish Americans, it's religious right, it's many Americans. For the same reason, I suppose, to a certain degree, that Lord Balfour thought Palestine should be Jewish. They have a dim view of Arabs, and they have a very high view of Jews. I'm not going to go through all of these, but there are a lot of reasons that Palestinians are upset and angry. Let's just look at the last two. Both innocent Israelis and innocent Palestinians have been killed and died tragically over the years. But the overwhelming majority of the casualties, 87% from the 15 years, 2000 to 14, have been Palestinian. Since Israel occupied the West Bank and Gaza in 1967, over almost 1 million Palestinians have been imprisoned for periods of times. Today, there's over 1,000 Palestinians in prison in Israel with no charges brought against them. And they can be held for 6 months and then renewed for 6 months. So let me just run through this. I'm going to just go to, here's the last little map give you a sense that there's 2.1 million Palestinians in Gaza. And Gaza is only 25 miles long, 6 miles wide. It's one of the most densely populated pieces of land on earth. 40% of Gazans don't have a job, are unemployed. Well over 2/3 live in abject poverty. So it's a very unhappy place. Israel controls what gets in and what gets out. There's no port, there's no airport, there's no port on the ocean because they're not allowed to have one for fear that they might bring in weapons. And let me conclude by quoting President Biden yesterday, who said that he has no confidence in the number that the Palestinians are using for their dead. The health ministry in Gaza says that over 6,500 have been killed. Now we have to remember that Hamas killed 1,400 Israelis brutally. 2,700 of those are children, the health ministry says, that have been bombed in these houses. And President Obama said, I have no notion that the Palestinians are telling the truth about how many people are killed. I'm sure that there have been innocents killed, and it's the price of waging war, Biden said. But these sorts of statements, of course, infuriate Palestinians because they feel an echo of Churchill. That American leadership doesn't take them seriously and doesn't believe them. And this leads to a constant sense of frustration amongst Palestinians. And as if this story isn't dark enough, the West Bank is the hope for Palestinians, that they can have self-determination, that they could have a state of their own, and a future that isn't occupation and humiliation with no rights. But that future is largely lost. Now, President Biden is gaining lots of goodwill in Israel by supporting Israel today in the face of Palestinian opposition. And he's giving Israel time to deal with Gaza political cover, by saying they have a right to do what they're doing. And he has vetoed efforts in the UN Security Council to say, let's have a ceasefire or a pause in bombing for humanitarian reasons. And America vetoed them. So he's covering for Israel, and he's going to get a lot of goodwill from Israel. This would be his chance to say, Israel, we will help you in Gaza, but you have to make a two-state solution come to fruition. I'm not sure he's going to do that. Otherwise, Palestinians are going to become increasingly desperate and more radicalized, like Hamas became in Gaza. Thank you.
Hi, and thank you for coming. Thanks, Emily, Stacy. Everything is good. And before I start, let me reflect on some of the things that Dr. Landis talked about. And by that time, it's already here, so it's fine. When it comes to historic Palestine, there are valid claims on both sides. Jews and Palestinian Arabs have very strong, valid claims to Palestine. Religious, cultural, historical, and Christians along the lines, by the way. And Palestinians have Christians and Jews and Muslims among them, and actually there is a small minority Jewish Palestinian population that still live in the West Bank. But that's a different story, and it could take a long time to explain. The most valid arguments Palestinians always say is that for the last 13 centuries, we have been residing as a majority in Palestine, and that takes us to what Josh was talking about, is by the time when Balfour, the Foreign Secretary of the UK, gave Palestine to the Jewish people, or the Jewish community. The letter was to Rothschild. The population was 10%. And in the letter, one of the points I wanted to say, he referenced to the 90% as the non-Jewish population, or the non-Jewish groups. And they should be given civil rights, but not political rights. He did not say not political rights, but he mentioned the civil rights. So from the start, you could see this alliance between the Zionist movement and British colonialism that later on became associated with American colonialism in that setting. The dehumanizations of Arabs and Palestinians, all you really have to do is read some of Edward Said's reflections on how the East in general, or the Orientalists, viewed the East in ways that are sometimes referred to as unstructured society. Sometimes they can go really clearly and talk about them, and sometimes you hear that in the news as barbarians or savages or whatever kinds of things. So that's also part of this colonial legacy that you still see it. And of course, Biden is consistent with that legacy when he makes comments and reflections where the United States is pro-Israel at all costs. Two professors who are giants in international relations theory, Marsheimer and Waltz, referred to that one time. The United States, whether Republicans or Democrats, are willing to support Israel at all costs, even if it threatens Israel's interest. And that is possibly what may happen from this. Do you really want to go to war with Iran and Hezbollah and other countries in the region over Gaza? Should the United States play a more even-handed approach to resolve a conflict that can be resolved? It's a political conflict. Looking also at what Josh said in relation to various Palestinian entities. One of those Palestinian population is the one that lives inside Israel and has citizenships. But in 2018, the Israeli government issued a national law, and that's where democracy become questioned. And that's where Yuval Harari, who is an Israeli philosopher, said Israel is going toward dictatorship. And that national law clearly gives preference to Jews, not including non-Jews, who are equal citizens, supposed to be equal citizens. I mean, if we look at democracy, well, some of the fundamental elements of democracy, equal treatment under the law. So whether you are a Jew or a non-Jew, apply it to the United States. And imagine if Christians come in the United States and say, we are Christians, we have to be treated differently. That would be a contradiction to the very ideals of democracy. So it is very important to look at all of these kinds of things. One interesting fact is about Obama. President Obama, and actually before that, after the Gulf War, James Baker, that was the Secretary of State, both tried to tie aid to Israel with restrictions on settlements. And when James Baker was asked, why are you putting restrictions on Israel and not putting restrictions on Arabs? He said, we're not giving them money. We're not giving Arabs money. All we want to do is from those close to $4 billion that you get every year, Israel, don't use them in the territories. Don't use them to build settlements in violation of international law. So there are many other things very interesting to look at. But let me go to 2 points, one addressing Gaza and the other addressing the international setting. or various settings, among them the international setting. So if we look at the situation in Gaza, you cannot ignore the most important part in the news, which is Hamas. Hamas is a religious, political organization, locally oriented to address its supporters in relation to fighting Israel. Whether it's a terrorist organization or not, that is completely different subject, and it is very important. It carries out attacks that are considered by international law to be war crimes. But Israel also carries out attacks that are war crimes. The United States carried attacks that were considered war crimes. Henry Kissinger still, many tried to follow him in order to bring him to international justice and stuff like that for the types of things that were committed in the name of the United States, in the name of Israel. I'm not justifying, I'm explaining. Civilians, regardless to whether they're Jews, Palestinians, Americans, or anybody else, attacking civilians is a crime against humanity, is brutal, is devastating, and should not, even in Maine this morning, we have some guy who was shooting people randomly. And come and talk to a lot of Americans about gun control, they would be very upset. No, the Second Amendment is quite significant in this respect. So it's very important to look at Hamas, that was created in late 1987, like around December 87, become quite popular immediately during the first Intifada in 1988. One interesting fact, and you would see if you read Haaretz newspaper, which is an Israeli newspaper, very liberal. There is a guy named Dmitry Shamsky, not Chomsky, Shamsky. And he wrote various articles about Hamas and Netanyahu's government. In 1988-89, Israel tolerated Hamas. Why? Divide and rule policy. Let's support the religious groups to counter the nationalist Palestinians and keep Palestinians divided and fighting each other, which really happened. In the last few years, Qatar provided Hamas and Gaza with about $1 billion in assistance. That money came through Tel Aviv. Netanyahu's government was happy for that because it's telling, according to Dmitry Shamsky, he is interested in doing that because he wanted, again, to prevent the creation of a Palestinian state. How do you prevent a Palestinian state from being established? Divide Palestinians. Say they're not united. They don't know how to unite, how to address their goals and their rights and their claims, and demonize Palestinians. And that is exactly what's happening in Gaza. So when the president is looking, how are people going to believe you when you're talking about the victims in Ukraine? I mean, why you are addressing Palestinian life as being disposable, insignificant, unimportant, and just, while on the other hand you're crying, you should be crying for both babies, Palestinians and Israelis. There is a courageous Knesset member, an Israeli Jew, who came to the Knesset last week and gave a speech and said, children of Gaza are just like the children of Israel. She was attacked. She was humiliated. They told her, members of the Knesset, you can't compare Palestinian children with Jewish children. There is no comparison. And that's when you become selective in your humanity, when you have problems. Most of the population in Gaza, 80% of them are refugees. And Gazans have experienced many wars. You would forget the names of these wars. There are so many. But primarily, a turning point was 2005, when Israel's forces withdrew from Gaza and said, okay, make Gaza the Singapore of the Middle East. How are you going to make Gaza the Singapore of the Middle East? When you have a siege in 2007, after the election, yes, Palestinians elected Hamas, not the Palestinian Authority. Not because they like Hamas. It's kind of like, why you elected Biden? Tell me. Why did you elect Biden? Most of those who elected Biden, including me, It's because we don't want Trump. I mean, that is where you would find in the Palestinian Authority was corrupt. The Palestinian Authority is viewed by most Palestinians as a subcontractor. It's doing Israel's work in the territories. So Palestinians didn't want that. So they went to, there is no other leaderships at this point. So anyway, was that a mistake? Yes. But even if you want to blame Gazans for electing Hamas, that was 2007. More than half of the population of Gaza are children. So those who were born and were still children have nothing to do with the elections of Hamas, and they are paying the price right now in massive numbers. We're talking this morning about more than 7,000 Palestinians were killed. And by the time we leave, there will be 500 or 200 more, and the United States is refusing to put a pause on this conflict to bring water to these people. And I mean, there are a lot, you probably watched the news. 2008 and 2014 were two massive attacks, not ground wars, but massive attacks from Israel against Gaza. And 2023 followed October 7th. Listen, October 7th's attacks were shocking, were extreme, were brutal. At the same time, they were expected. They were expected by the Israelis. They built a wall, fence. They put the most sophisticated surveillance. Why you expect? I mean, you would not do that to your neighbor. If you are not expecting they're going to hit you, hit them so many times they're going to hit you. The UN secretary made that statement that the attack on October 7th did not happen in a vacuum. He was called anti-Semite. No, you can be both pro-Palestinians and pro-Jews at the same time. Actually, most of the supporters of the Palestinian cause in the United States are young Jews. And you would see them. They went to the Congress the other day. They occupied Congress. They said, not in our names. So it's not a question of your religious identity. It's a question of your humanity. Whether you're Jewish or not, it doesn't really matter. The reaction was also expected. Do you think Hamas members did not expect that Israel is going to do what it's doing? No, they did expect that. And that is where the act itself, aside from all the problems with it, is a rational act. Because it's going to lead to your destruction. I mean, one of the consequences that we might have here is either Hamas is going to be destroyed completely, so it's a suicidal act, or be sidelined completely. And there's no future for it. Are you crazy to do something like that? I mean, usually political actors are rational actors trying to survive, not to commit suicide. That's why we don't do the things crazy people do, because we don't want to die. But anyway, this should tell you something about life in Gaza. Since the siege in 2007, there are people in Gaza that never left this 25 miles territory. Never in their life. They can't. Because when you want to leave, you have to have a major emergency, probably medical emergency. Other than that, it's very difficult. So you're living on top of each other, as Edward Said called it. Let's look at the international setting. The Palestinians realize that the world doesn't really care about them. I mean, they've realized that a long time ago, not just now. The Ukraine war was very important, and it's still very important. Russia has been involved in almost 3 years, so the Palestinian question is on the sideline. It's not very important. And you have various other conflicts. The Oslo peace process started in 1992, 93, and to this day it remains a process. Palestinians by then assumed that they would be getting a state within 5 years after the Oslo process. They're still assuming that. But the state that they were supposed to be getting, that Josh was talking about, is the West Bank and Gaza. And the West Bank is shrinking. You have 750,000 settlers in it. Where are you going to build the state? So the fact of the matter is now we have one state. Israel and the West Bank are indistinguishable from each other. Except this one state is an apartheid state. Because the people in the West Bank and the people of Gaza don't have citizenship. They don't. I mean, we do. I live in the West Bank. I mean, I visit like every 6 months, and I'll show you some pictures if we have time. We don't have. We have a Palestinian passport. Useless. I mean, it's really useless. As an American citizen, when I go to the West Bank, if I show them my American passport, they don't look at it. You're not an American. You're a Palestinian. Because if they accept me to enter there as an American, I would have rights. But if I enter as a Palestinian, I have none. And that's the case. There are more than 600 people, Americans in Gaza. Is the administration asking about them? No. They're Palestinians. It's irrelevant. Nobody discusses anything about it. They are under bombardment. They tried to call the US embassy to leave. They can't. So there are a lot of problems at the international setting and the Palestinian problem. At the regional setting, Palestinians are out in the cold. The Arab states, especially the Gulf states, have established Abrahamic accords with Israel, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and others. And Saudi Arabia, it's not news. I mean, Saudi Arabia have secret relations, excellent relations with Israel for many years. Actually, the killing of Khashoggi, if you remember him, was done in part because of Israeli surveillance that they were able to track where he is. And they advised the Saudis about that. This is not a secret. So, for the most part, when you're talking about the Israelis, they are very sophisticated in surveillance. They are excellent. And they have the fourth strongest army in the world. How did Hamas, with their primitive means, that's what's shocking to Israelis, to Palestinians, to Hamas members themselves. How did you do that? You're selling your technology to the rest of the world. You are experimenting on Palestinians, and it didn't work. So Iran and Hezbollah, of course, those are the most important players. Morsi probably was the most that helped Gazans for 1 year, I think 2013 or 2014, because Morsi is from the Brotherhood movement, and Hamas is also, and Morsi have that sympathy for Palestine. Sisi, according to some Israelis, he's more Zionist than Netanyahu. So there's nothing to expect from Sisi. Sisi is also participating in the siege of Gaza. Sisi is the president of Egypt. At the local setting, you have the West Bank that Josh talked about. You have the failed peace process. But let me address Israeli politics. In the last, are we done?
No, you're good.
In the last many weeks, 16, 20 weeks, Israelis every Saturday, hundreds of thousands go and demonstrate against this government. Remember, this is one of the most extreme governments in Israel's history. And Netanyahu have been in politics, in power, for a very long time, almost 2 decades. So you're talking about the right of Israeli politics there. And one of the things that Netanyahu was focusing on is annexing the West Bank, because that's what his government wants, by expanding settlements. But one obstacle was in his way is the judicial system in Israel. So he wanted to reform the judiciary to make the judiciary subordinate to the executive. Imagine if Biden comes and say, hey, the Supreme Court, I have a problem with you. I don't want you playing the role. That would create the same kind of reaction, if not more, in this country. I mean, this is a major change. And not only that, this is also why Yuval Harari was saying Israel is going toward dictatorship because of the policies of this current government. So Hamas is watching, actually, and they realize that Israelis are busy with their judicial issues. Israel is busy with the West Bank. It took some units from Gaza and put them in the West Bank to support settlers. Settlers attacked 2 towns. None of you probably heard of it, I'm assuming. And if you did, tell me. There are 2 towns I'm sure Josh handled it. 2 towns, Hawara and Turmisaya. They burned the houses there. They went to the civilians that have the settlers. And the soldiers, the Israeli army, was just protecting them, doing nothing. So they sent many of the units from Gaza, and that's where they lived. And by the way, the kibbutzim is a name that is more associated with liberalism, actually. So many of the population of those kibbutzim in southern Israel are liberals. Many of them are in favor of the two-state solution. Many of them are interested in peace relationship with the Palestinians. So there is a big difference between the kibbutzim and the settlers. The settlers in the West Bank are the ones who believe God chose them, so they are superior to every race. So they're racist in many ways. And they believe that this land was given to them by God, period. No discussion. God's words are more important. This reminds me when one settler was asked, when George Bush, he was the first to declare, I support the two-state solution. And one settler was asked, and the settler's answer, God gave the land to Abraham, not to Bush. Why didn't you say that to Rothschild? You know? So it is quite interesting. At the local setting, you have also the Palestinian Authority that is corrupt, contractor, and stuff like that. Leadership is quite important. So if we look at leadership, we could be looking at Netanyahu, very powerful. The guy speaks fluent English, studied at MIT, very eloquent, very popular in the United States, especially with Christian evangelicals, have very strong ties, which is quite strange, but that's a different lecture when talking about the relationship between the two. Abu Mazen was the leader of the Palestinian Authority, is corrupt and weak. He's 88, so he's going to leave the scene soon, sooner or later. So things are quite bad. Now you have Biden in office. Biden, for political reasons only, provided you could support Israel. There's no problem with supporting Israel. Nobody is telling you not to support Israel. But at the same time, you have to look at tragedies in an equal way. You can't just delete the Palestinians from Gaza and say they are insignificant and it is very important. So he participated with the narrative, the Israeli narrative, trying to get the Gazans, remember, those are 80% refugees, trying to get them to Sinai as refugees again. But Palestinians realize if they go to Sinai, they're not coming back to Gaza. So they're saying, we are willing to die in here. They write the names of their children on their legs. Imagine you have to write the names of your child or children on their legs. So if they die, you can identify them. You look at, if their leg is still there. So it is quite dangerous in this respect. How do you move this? Okay, this. Anyway, I'm not going to, because this is a lot. Do I have any time? No? Okay. Then this is about scenarios for resolving the conflict. This is the promised land that, religious Jews believe, but then they shrunk it into modern day Israel plus the West Bank and Gaza. Some still believe that Jordan is part of it, especially if we're talking about the Balfour Declaration. And this is exactly like what Josh was talking about in terms of the population distribution. And that is by the time Israel was about to be established, you could see how the majority of the population are Palestinians. This is one point I wanted to mention, is that although the West Bank is like this, the West Bank, in accordance to the Oslo process, was divided into 3 areas. Area A, B, C. And the point here is what Josh mentioned, is like the Swiss cheese formula. So you put population centers and you surround them with Israeli security. So for me, in the West Bank, when I visit my mother, if I want to go and visit my aunt, which is by car about 7 to 8 minutes away, it could take me hours to get there because of the checkpoints. And I'll show you the checkpoint. This is Jerusalem, and you could see the blue is where the Israeli settlements are moving. Those are the checkpoints. that you have to go through as a Palestinian living in the West Bank. I'm talking daily. So actually, many Palestinians, like in my town, because they have to go to another town, they are 7 to 10 minutes away. They rent an apartment in the city because they may not get to work the second day. That daily humiliation is very, very difficult. This is if we're talking about Hezbollah. 2006 is like this. Gaza is much worse. There are experts who are saying the amount of bombings that happened in Gaza is far more than what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki at this point. This is the massive wall. This is the type of checkpoints that I go through every time I'm in the West Bank. Now, if they catch me taking these pictures, I would be in trouble. And by the way, on every one of these checkpoints, I see old Israeli women sitting in black protesting these checkpoints, not in our names. But if we try to talk to them, they are silent because they're afraid that authorities will not allow them to sit there if they interact with us. So this is daily thing that you would see. This is one of the most interesting things. I mean, it's terrible. This is garbage. So settlers in Hebron came and built settlements, and they start throwing their garbage on the Palestinians that are living. This is a daily occurrence. So Palestinians put some kind of things to cover themselves from the garbage and the other stuff that is being thrown. Those are, my cousin took those pictures in Hebron. This is where my cousin lived, in a refugee camp. And you can see how narrow and how close related houses are. This is the difference between one house and another. It's a very narrow road. If you are, an obese, you can't really make it through this sometimes. It's very tough. And this is Penske, and this is the history of the refugees. This is one of the things about human. I wanted to show you this picture. See this little girl? It was used as a Ukrainian girl, and 2 million or more were in support of her. She's a Palestinian kid that after they arrested her brother, she was trying to attack the Israeli. Look at this kid. She was put in jail. That's her, Free Ahd at-Tamimi. And that's Obama when he said, let's put conditions on Israel's aid. He became, that's how Yasser Arafat, if you're familiar with him, he's dead. That's how he used to wear the headscarf or the kufiya. So Obama in Israel was like this. He's like a radical terrorist. And they wrote his name Hussein specifically to demonize the guy. And that is how you are dealing with these kinds of things. So I'll stop here, and thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm gonna come up there.
Yeah.
Either way.
Let me get the water.
Let me not turn off the fire alarm that I just ran into. Thankfully, it pulls. Questions from the audience?
Yeah.
My friend,
Go ahead.
Here, can you hear?
So, going along with what you were saying about how there are many conflicts.
I can't hear you.
Yeah, honey. I gave you a microphone for a reason.
Going along with what you were talking about, the conflicts to side ownership of the land. Knowing that Israel has like alliances that will give a lot of military fighting the Palestinians, do you think that basically, you think the Palestinians were fighting a fair fight when it came to depending like the religion or like they have before the Jewish campaign?
Is it a-
Are the
okay.
Palestinians
Thank you.
fighting a fair fight?
Or is Israel stronger and have more alliances? No. Israel is, as Professor Muhammad said, Israel is the fourth strongest military in the world, according to some calculations. But it's a very powerful military with lots of technology. The United States and Israel have an alliance, and the United States guarantees through a treaty with Israel a qualitative military edge. That's what's called the QME. That any combination of Arab states, Israel should be able to beat it. And that's why we sell F-35s, for example, our stealth fighters, to Israel, but we don't sell them to any Arab states. Because in order to keep that qualitative edge, we help with the missile technology and so forth, which we keep from Arab states, even though they want it. And that was part of the reason why Saudi wanted to make this deal with Israel, so that they could get better technology. But the point is Israel is far superior in terms of the military. The problem is that Iran has been supporting these non-state actors like Hezbollah, like Hamas, and so forth, in an effort to balance that a little bit. And Israel is frightened of that. And Israel is trying to diminish that power. What could that be in the future? I don't know. But it's clearly a worry for Israelis today, and about 180,000 or 108,000 Israelis have been moved away from the border with Lebanon and Syria for fear that maybe Hezbollah would send missiles into Israel. So that anxiety is there for Israelis who are fearful that this could be, that the future could change the balance of power. Sam, I want to give you that in case you have it.
I have this. You can carry
It's
that.
okay, I'll take it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Can you scream?
Yeah.
Scream for me. Do it.
So, what does Biden gain from vetoing, like not stopping the bombing that they're doing in Palestine? What does he gain from being pro-Israel?
What does Biden gain from being pro-Israel?
The pro-Israel sentiments, forget whether they are, not only Biden. Biden actually is probably more moderate than Nikki Haley, who said, finish them, in reference to both Iran and Gaza. Better than Lindsey Graham, who said, level the place. Better than Hakeem Jeffrey, who's very vehement supporter of Israel. So why the support for Israel? Historically, you're talking about a lot of factors, but most of them are domestic. And the most important factor here is that both Democrats and Republicans are trying to respond to lobbying and interest groups and coalitions in their setting in the United States. So you have at least two major players. If you are a Republican, then evangelical Christians are a very important player. You're talking about 70 million. Not all of them are evangelical Christians, but they support biblical understandings about the importance of Israel in the end time. And they have played a very significant role. But remember, some elements of those are actually anti-Semites. John Hagee one time made a very controversial statement saying God sent Hitler for a reason. And then he had to backtrack that and to explain that the idea of evangelical Christians is to bring as many Jews as possible to Israel, all Israel, which include the territories, the West Bank and Gaza and others, so we can accelerate the return of Jesus. At the end, Jews would die, all non-evangelicals will be killed. So what the Israelis did with this, especially Netanyahu, they took the politics and ignored the theology. The politics is supportive of Israel. The theology, we don't care. Believe whatever you believe in. Now, not all religious Jewish trends are in support of evangelicals. There are Jews in Israel that you could start seeing them probably in the news or in TikToks or other places who are basically telling Christian evangelicals in Jerusalem and other places to leave the country. They wanted to issue legislations to ban them from working in Israel. On the other side, especially Democrats, it's AIPAC. But AIPAC influenced both Republicans and Democrats. But Democrats don't really have connections with evangelical Christians. They have more of a connection with AIPAC. AIPAC is not a Jewish organization. It's pro-Israel, mostly Zionists. So it includes Jews and non-Jews. But there are also trends, and basically they are very strong, like the gun lobby in here. I mean, Mersheimer and Waltz talked about the pro-Israel lobby to be very important. So that is significant. There are other Jewish organizations like Voices for Peace, If Not Now, When, and others, who basically are in favor. The large majority of Jews in the United States, the large majority of liberal Jews around the world are in support of coexistence within a two-state solution. Now, there are other geopolitical reasons why the United States, Israel played a role throughout the Cold War period, but Israel receives close to $4 billion a year, so it is being paid for all the expenses that it provided over the years. There might be other cultures. Now, the question that is always raised, we share democratic values, or it's the only democracy in the world. Well, I've told you, fundamentals of democracy is equal treatment under the law, popular sovereignty, which means everybody that is there is entitled to the same, one person, one vote. But you're not having this. So Israel is now doing the following. That's why often it's referred to as an apartheid state. It has different laws to different residents of the state that they call Israel. So if you are a non-Jew, even those Palestinians who are inside Israel, who have Israeli citizenships, there are restrictions on housing, on education, on a lot of other things, but they have a lot more rights than the people like me. Talking about refugees, most of those in the West Bank are also refugees because I came from a refugee family. My father was in Haifa, or in a town near Haifa that does not exist anymore. My kids who were born in the United States are refugees. I gave them the refugee. Palestinians are very proud of their refugee status, like we don't want to lose it. Maybe one day we will get compensation. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but that is one of the things in which you could deal with addressing people in the West Bank or Gaza. Now, there are other factors, the Western guilt in relation to the Holocaust. Yes, Jews are among the most who suffered historically. But as one Israeli historian said, Palestinians paid the price. Europe should have paid the price, because Europe is the one that practiced anti-Semitism and discrimination and brutality against Jews. And Palestinians are disposable people to the West, to the United States policy, and others. So when you put Biden is acting for political purposes. It's very risky to support Palestinians or to be perceived supporting Palestinians. Very risky. And already Biden have problems. So you don't want to add to his problems. Yes.
That's fair. All right, we probably have one more question. Oh, I've got dueling hands, man. I think the person in the back with the maroon. Yes, you. I saw you jet up first. Scream.
Well, you said that you lived in the West Bank, right? Yeah, so how are you able to leave?
The West Bank, you can go and leave. And I am an American citizen. That's a different story. But I was born and raised in the West Bank. There are people who leave. But whenever I go back, even with my American citizen, the first one to check me is an Israeli. When I leave, the last one to check me is an Israeli. So there is no Palestinian sovereignty. There is no control for Palestinians anywhere, whether it's in Gaza or the West Bank, on land, air, or sea. But at the individual level, people leave. Now, there's another thing. Many Palestinians in the West Bank have Jordanian citizenship. So when I came in 1985, none of you probably were born. When I came to this country in 1985 as a student, I came on a Jordanian passport. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, can we thank our speakers one more time? This is fantastic.